System review time, and today we're going to have a look at the Atari 7800. I'll get through the boring bit first. Specifications. The CPU is a MOS Technologies 6502C running at 1.79 MHz. This drops to 1.19 MHz when the TIA chip is accessed. I'll talk a little bit about that later. RAM is 4K, ROM is 4K with 48K on board of the cartridges. Graphics are generated by a custom chip called Maria. If I can read my printing here because my printer's on the fritz. It's got a resolution of 160 by 288 in PAL, 160 by 240 in NTSC. It'll display 25 colours out of a palette of 256, and the graphics clock speed is 7.16 MHz. Sound and backwards compatibility for the Atari 2600 games is produced by the TIA chip, which is exactly the same chip as was in the Atari 2600 and was developed by the legendary late great J Miner. Value of these things today, it's not really a specification, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It's between 20 and 50 pounds in the UK, depending on the condition it's in, whether it's boxed, whether there's games bundled or whatever. The value does seem to be going up, but you really shouldn't pay more than 50 quid for one of these, particularly in the UK, and I'll show you why later. So anyway, backwards compatibility was provided by the TIA chip, as I've mentioned. The Maria chip, designed by GCC, took care of the improved graphics capabilities, and sound generally was taken care of by the TIA chip, which meant most 7800 games just sounded like 2600. But you could have enhanced sound, which was produced by the Pokey audio chip, which could be included in games cartridges. Though at the end of the day, this only appeared in 2 games that I'm aware of, Ball Blazer and Commando. Software encryption was included to prevent unauthorized and often pornographic games from accessing the Maria chip. So basically anything that wasn't licensed, the hardware just reverted to 2600 specs. So yeah, you probably did get some unauthorized games on it, but it was just 2600 type software. Okay, let's have a look at the console itself. You've got your power button there, pause button there, little LED there. When you turn your power on, the LED lights up red, as you'd expect. Select button there. Well, that hasn't been pressed in any recent years. I certainly haven't pressed it. Reset button there. So it's all quite similar to what you would get on a 2600, albeit buttons instead of switches, and you haven't got the difficulty switches up there. In fact, you have them under here. There, your difficulty high and low. I actually have never even noticed those, switched them, done anything with them, was kind of oblivious of their existence. 9-pin sockets, basically a standard Atari socket, although it does have a 2-button pad as opposed to the 1-button stick. Though it is a stick in the US. Yeah. Open cartridge socket, slot, whatever you want to call it. Very similar to the 2600 one. Complete dust trap, though I haven't had any trouble with it. And unlike your 2600 cartridges, your 7800 ones don't have that clever flappy thing. Yeah. You see, 2600 ones are closed. They've got like a, well, this. Trying to work out how it works. Can't do it. Anyway, it protects them from dust, and these haven't got that, which is a shame. I wonder if actually these are just a couple of dodgy ones. I'm going to have to look. No, none of my 7800 cartridges have that cover on them. Anyway, let's have a look round the back. What have we got? Power input, very non-standard. RF out to plug to your aerial socket. That probably an expansion thing that never got included. My guess is that's what it is. There is reference to that in literature. Yeah, underside there's really not much here. You can see the shielding inside there. It's got a reasonable amount of shielding. Atari model number 7800, PAL 1, Atari Corporation, made in China, and a big long serial number. Atari Corporation, Sunnyvale. Quality control passed. I'd like to know what dipstick passed this, because the image quality from this thing is horrible. You'll see that later. There it is. That's, I mean, yeah. There's nothing on the sides, nothing whatsoever. Nothing on that side either. Apart from a nice venting on the top here and at the back, which is probably completely unnecessary, but it looks nice. And that is one thing I do like about the 7800. Whatever else it may be, I personally find it a very pretty console. Yeah. Moving on. As you may or may not be aware, the controller that was released with the 7800 in Europe is entirely different to the one that arrived in the US. We have this here pad that you'll have seen in earlier views. 2 button, 2 separate, functions for those buttons, and this, which is really cool because you can put it off. And you've just got a D-pad, and it is actually a really nice D-pad. It's got a very positive, clicky feel to it. It goes where you point it. You know where it's pointing. There's none of this, am I hitting a diagonal or not? And you can put that little thumb pad stick doofer on it, which is nice on some games and doesn't work so well on others. In the US you got that, was it called a Proline joystick? I came across one with a 2600 that I bought. I think they released that with the Junior over here. The 2600 Junior, I should say. I don't know how they compare to this. This feels a bit like using a Master System pad. Not great, but it does the job. Of note, the power supply for the 7800, or rather the plug at the end of it, is very non-standard. So where with some games consoles, if they're sold without a power supply, you can just buy one of your multi-purpose supplies with the multiple jacks or plugs or whatever at the end. You can't do that with the 7800 because it has this. I don't know why they did that. It's kind of annoying. So yes, if you're looking to buy one, if it hasn't got the power supply, really don't bother, because they're not the easiest of things to find, and you probably more easily find a 7800 with a power supply than a power supply on its own. So if it hasn't got one, don't bother. Right then, a little bit of history. Following the failure of the Atari 5200, and with the Atari 2600 sales flagging, Atari commissioned a survey to find out what it was Atari gamers actually wanted. Makes a change actually for them to say, what do you want, rather than we're giving you this, you better want it. Plenty of that going around these days. Anyway, the results were very telling. People wanted compatibility with the 2600. I think there are some current generation manufacturers who would do well to remember that one. Anyway, they wanted a reasonable price. This is all very telling. And good ports of their favourite modern arcade games. So the 2600 had been great at the classic arcade games, but there was more modern stuff out there in the arcades, and they wanted to play that. It was originally going to be called the 3600, but that just sounded too much like a step back from the 5200. So Atari decided they would take the 2600 name, they would take the 5200 name, they would stick them together, and hey presto, you've got a 7800. You can see their thinking. Surprisingly, the 7800 wasn't built in-house by Atari, but was farmed out to GCC, General Computer Corporation. These guys, and they were largely a bunch of students initially, they had some dealings with Atari already, having been sued by Atari for producing the Missile Command speed-up board. Atari then, seeing that these were a bunch of very talented young people, hired them to develop software and the like, and they farmed out the development of the 7800 to them. Yeah, GCC are also known for producing the Pac-Man enhancement kit called Crazy Otto. This was snapped up by Midway and rebranded and sold as Miss Pac-Man. So, in 1984, the new system had been announced and was just about to be launched when Warner Communications announced they were selling off the Atari home gaming division thing, which was promptly bought by Jack, and I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, Trammell. You don't pronounce the I, so is it Trammell or Trammell? I'm going to call it Trammell, and if it's wrong, sue me. Well, don't, you know. Yeah, he had very little interest in consoles. He was all about the computers. He was into the 8-bit line, and then later on got into the ST. Consoles, he just wasn't interested. He didn't completely can the 7800. He just put it on the back burner, de-emphasized it, and insisted that retailers sell it at cost, $50, so they weren't making any profits whatsoever. So, needless to say, most of them didn't want to sell it at all. By 1986, the NES and the Master System were hitting the market big time, at which point Jack decided, okay, we've got this 7800 thing, we'd better try and compete or we're going to lose the market. Too little too late, really. Sales were reasonable by Atari standards, but that wasn't saying much, because basically they were cheap bastards who wouldn't put money into anything. Everything they did was on the cheap, and people reacted to it all appropriately. They didn't buy it. So anyway, by about 92, production of the 7800 ceased. For me, the biggest problem with the Atari 7800 is this interference that you get on the screen. You can see it in particular down there. I've got two 7800s. They both do this. I don't know what is causing it. I've heard different reports. One is that it's capacitors are on the way out. Another, well, there are mods that will take care of it. I don't know if it's sound interfering with the video, though there is no sound here, so it shouldn't be. But this is apparently really common on PAL models of the 7800. I don't know about NTSC ones, but for me it ruins what would otherwise be a fantastic console. I mean, it didn't do well in the late 80s, early 90s. It couldn't compete with the NES or the Master System. They were technically superior anyway, but they had a different kind of game. They were into games with depth that went on, you know, were longer, more involved. Atari games were all about arcade experiences. You know, if you had an arcade game, the Atari was the system it was on. Pole Position 2 being a perfect case in point. And that for me is perfect, because that's the kind of game that I love. I don't want to play Mario, but I would love to play this. But it's just so horrible because of all that interference that it just, for me, destroys what's otherwise a lovely games console. It's such a shame. Maybe one of these days I will find a mod that I can do, because my own personal soldering skills are extremely limited. I'm kind of just starting to get into it, but that's all by the by. Yeah, it is a flaw. So there you have it, the Atari 7800. Should you buy one? Well, if you can get one nice and cheap, yeah, 20 quid, 30 quid, yeah, why not? The £50 boxed examples, well, unless the seller can absolutely guarantee you that it's a good one without all that graphical interference, frankly, I wouldn't. Unless you're one of these people who just wants to keep it in the box on the shelf, really, I wouldn't. If you want to play the thing, make sure it's a good one without the interference, because apparently some of them, well, they do exist. I don't know which is more common, the ones with or without the interference. But if you want to play the thing, see if you can find out. Other than that, yeah, reasonable selection of games. They cost more than 2600 games, but then they're better than 2600 games and significantly rarer. Which is not to say that it's an especially rare system, it's just not especially successful either. Yeah, find one at the right price, I would. Okay, that'll do I think. Thank you for watching.